For the past few months, Olivia had been coming home later than usual. Her yoga classes seemed to stretch longer, and her excuses became increasingly vague. "We grabbed tea after class," she'd say, or "traffic was terrible." At first, I didn't think much of it. Life gets busy, and Olivia had always been an independent person. But the distance between us started growing. Conversations felt strained, and her laughter, once so easy, now seemed forced. One night, I noticed her phone buzzing incessantly while she was in the shower. I glanced at the screen out of habit and saw a message preview. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you." My stomach dropped. I didn't recognize the number. When Olivia came out, I asked casually, "Who's texting you so late?" She froze for just a second, so brief I almost missed it, before brushing it off. "Work stuff," she said, tucking the phone away. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities, though I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Maybe it really was work. But the following weeks only deepened my unease. Olivia started dressing differently. More stylish, even provocative outfits that didn't align with her usual yoga attire. And she seemed glued to her phone, tilting the screen away whenever I entered the room. I shared my worries with my best friend, Tom, over beers in the garage. "Maybe she's just trying to spice things up, man," he suggested, though his tone wasn't convincing. "You should talk to her, Alex. Don't jump to conclusions." Talking to her was easier said than done. Olivia had mastered the art of deflecting. Anytime I brought up the changes I noticed, she'd accuse me of being paranoid or too controlling. "It's just yoga," she snapped one evening. "I need some time for myself, Alex." God, why do you have to make everything about you? Her defensiveness only fueled my doubts. Something wasn't adding up, and I knew I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Olivia's excuses were wearing thin, and her defensiveness only confirmed my worst fears. I decided to trust my gut, even if it meant doing something I wasn't proud of. One Friday evening, when she said she was heading to another yoga class, I told her I was working late. Instead, I followed her. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I kept my distance, careful not to be seen. She didn't head toward the yoga studio like I expected. Instead, her car turned into a quiet residential neighborhood. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her park in front of a small house. The porch light flickered on, and a man, tall, athletic, and unfamiliar, opened the door. Olivia stepped out of the car, adjusting her dress and smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. The smile wasn't for me. It hadn't been for a long time. I wanted to convince myself there was some innocent explanation, but the moment she leaned in and kissed him, really kissed him, I felt like the ground beneath me gave way. The life I thought we shared was a lie. My wife, the mother of my child, was cheating on me. I sat frozen in the car, my hands trembling. I couldn't breathe. Part of me wanted to burst through the door, to demand answers, to make sense of this betrayal. But I knew better. Storming in wouldn't change anything. It would just make an ugly situation worse. So I stayed, staring at the house until the lights in the front room flicked off. That's when I left. The drive home was a blur. I felt hollow, numb. My mind replayed the kiss over and over, like a scene from a bad movie I couldn't turn off. When Olivia came home hours later, I was waiting in the kitchen. She didn't seem surprised to see me. If anything, she looked annoyed. "You're up late," she said casually, kicking off her heels. She walked past me toward the fridge like nothing had happened. "Who is he, Olivia?" My voice was low but firm. She froze, her hand on the refrigerator door. Slowly, she turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about, Alex?" she asked, feigning innocence, but her tone lacked conviction. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, standing up. "I followed you tonight. I saw everything. So don't stand there and lie to me." Her face flushed, but instead of guilt, it was defiance. "You followed me," she hissed. "What the hell, Alex? That's crazy. You're acting like some kind of psycho. Don't turn this around on me." I snapped, my voice rising. "You lied to me. You've been lying to me for God knows how long. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" Olivia folded her arms, her jaw tightening. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing someone. But can you blame me? Look at us, Alex. You're always at work, always in the garage. You've been checked out for years. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. Are you serious right now? You're blaming me for this. My voice cracked with disbelief. I've been working my ass off for this family, providing for you and Emily, and this is how you repay me? Olivia rolled her eyes, like I was being dramatic. Don't act like you're some perfect husband. You've been distant, distracted. I needed more than what you were giving me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even trying to be. It was as if she had already made peace with her actions, leaving me to deal with the fallout. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. So, what now? I asked. Are you leaving? Or are you just going to keep sneaking around behind my back? Her expression softened for a moment, almost like she felt bad. But then she said, I don't know, Alex. I need time to think. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Time to think. You've had plenty of time to think while you were sneaking off with him. I think you've made your choice, Olivia. She didn't respond, just stood there staring at me, her face blank. Finally, she turned and walked upstairs without another word, leaving me alone in the kitchen. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the house as I sat back down, staring at the cold cup of coffee I'd been nursing all night. It felt like everything I knew, everything I thought I could rely on, was slipping through my fingers. For the first time, I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. The days that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. Olivia and I moved around the house like strangers, barely acknowledging each other. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Every now and then, I would catch her on her phone, her face blank but her fingers moving quickly. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. It was like she had already detached herself from our life, from me. I couldn't focus on anything. At work, I stared blankly at my computer screen for hours, the words on the page blurring together. At home, the garage, my sanctuary, felt more like a prison. I sat there surrounded by the tools and projects that used to bring me peace, but all I felt was anger and loss. My thoughts kept circling back to the betrayal. How long had she been lying to me? Was this man better than me? What did he offer her that I couldn't? Olivia's behavior made it clear that she wasn't interested in fixing things. She stopped making any effort to even pretend. She came and went as she pleased, sometimes staying out late, sometimes not coming home at all. When she was home, she was cold, indifferent. She never apologized, never showed any sign of regret. It was like I had become invisible to her. The worst part was Emily. She was too young to understand what was going on, but she could sense the tension. Her usual bubbly energy was dimmed, replaced by quiet glances and hesitant smiles. She would ask why Mommy and Daddy weren't eating together anymore or why Mommy was gone so much. I didn't know what to tell her. I didn't want to lie, but I couldn't bring myself to shatter her world either. So, I kept my answers vague, trying to shield her from the truth. Eventually, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a house filled with lies and betrayal. I contacted a lawyer and started the divorce process. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only option that made sense. Olivia didn't fight it. If anything, she seemed relieved. She agreed to mediation without much resistance, as though she had been waiting for me to be the one to end it. During the legal proceedings, I was asked to take a DNA test for Emily. It felt like a formality, something I didn't think much about. But when the results came back, they were like another punch to the gut. Emily wasn't my biological daughter. I had raised her, loved her, poured my heart into being her father, and yet she wasn't mine, not by blood. The news broke me in a way I didn't think was possible. It wasn't just the betrayal of Olivia's affair, it was the realization that even my bond with Emily, the one thing I thought was untouched by this mess, had been built on a lie. I felt like my entire life had been taken from me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. But despite the shock, I couldn't turn my back on Emily. She was still my daughter, regardless of biology. I had been there for her first steps, her first words, her first scraped knee. I couldn't just walk away from her because of something she had no control over. She didn't choose any of this, and she didn't deserve to suffer for Olivia's choices. Olivia, meanwhile, was spiraling. Her polished facade began to crack as reality set in. She had underestimated how much she relied on me, not just financially, but emotionally. She struggled to keep up with her bills, her lifestyle, and her responsibilities. Friends who once admired her started to pull away, uncomfortable with the mess she had created. Her charm, which had once been her greatest asset, was wearing thin. I, on the other hand, found strength in Emily. She became my anchor, the one thing that kept me from completely falling apart. Every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself that she needed me. She deserved stability, love, and someone who would always be there for her. If Olivia couldn't provide that, then I would. The divorce was finalized quietly, without much drama. Olivia moved into a small apartment across town, leaving Emily and me in the house that had once been our family home. It felt empty without her, but it also felt peaceful. There was no more tension, no more lies. Just me and Emily, figuring out our new normal together. Looking back, it felt like I had survived a storm that had torn everything apart. But in the aftermath, amidst the wreckage, I started to see the faint outlines of something new. A chance to rebuild, to start over, to find peace. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. After the divorce, life didn't immediately get easier. If anything, it felt like I was learning to walk again on shaky ground. Every part of my routine seemed foreign. The house, though quieter without Olivia, felt hauntingly empty. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events that led to this moment. The betrayal. The lies. The realization that Emily wasn't mine by blood. It was a spiral I couldn't seem to escape. Work became a welcome distraction. The projects, the deadlines, the noise, they gave me something to focus on besides my own thoughts. But even that wasn't enough. My co-workers, though supportive, couldn't fill the void. Friends I thought would stick by me faded away, unsure of what to say or how to help. I didn't blame them. The situation was messy, and people don't like getting involved in someone else's drama. Still, it stung. I was alone more often than not, left with nothing but my thoughts and a growing bitterness I couldn't seem to shake. Emily, though, was my light. She didn't understand the full weight of what was happening, but her little moments of kindness kept me grounded. She'd draw me pictures of the two of us, stick them to the fridge, and declare, "This is our family now." Every time I felt like falling apart, she pulled me back together. She gave me a reason to keep going, even when I didn't feel like it. But as much as I loved her, I still struggled with the truth about her paternity. I didn't tell her. She didn't need to know, not yet. She was my daughter in every way that mattered. But the knowledge lingered, gnawing at me in quiet moments. I couldn't help but wonder if she'd resent me one day for not being her real father, or if she'd choose to reconnect with Olivia instead. Those thoughts were painful, but I kept them to myself. Emily didn't deserve to carry the weight of my doubts. One evening, after a particularly rough day, I sat in the garage, staring blankly at an unfinished car project. It used to be my escape, but now it just reminded me of the life I had lost. That's when Tom, my best friend, showed up unannounced. He didn't say much, just handed me a beer and sat down beside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of comfort. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that I didn't have to face this alone. Tom mentioned a men's support group he'd heard about. At first, I scoffed at the idea. I wasn't the type to sit in a circle and pour my heart out to strangers. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed something, anything, to pull me out of the hole I was in. So, begrudgingly, I went. The group was a mix of men, all with their own stories of heartbreak and betrayal. Some were fresh out of relationships, their wounds still raw, while others had years of distance from their pain. Listening to them talk was both humbling and heartbreaking. Their experiences weren't identical to mine, but the emotions were familiar. Anger, sadness, confusion, and, eventually, the slow climb toward acceptance. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated. Saying it out loud felt like admitting defeat, like making it real all over again. But once I started talking, the words poured out. The affair. The lies. The DNA test. All of it. And for the first time, I didn't feel judged or pitted. These men understood. They didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me to move on. They just listened. Over the weeks, the group became a lifeline. It wasn't just about sharing pain, it was about finding strength. Hearing how others had rebuilt their lives gave me hope that I could do the same. Slowly, I started to focus less on what I had lost and more on what I still had. Emily, my career, and a future that wasn't defined by Olivia's betrayal. Meanwhile, Olivia's life seemed to unravel. Without the stability of our marriage, she struggled to keep up appearances. Mutual friends whispered about her falling out with the man she had cheated with, and I noticed she was taking on extra shifts to cover her bills. She reached out a few times, but the conversations were brief and cold. She asked about Emily, but I kept my answers short. I wasn't interested in rehashing the past or giving her more space in my life than she already had. It wasn't about revenge. I had no desire to see her suffer. But it was clear that Olivia was reaping the consequences of her actions, while I was learning to rebuild. Slowly, I started to see a path forward. It wasn't easy, and the scars were still fresh, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I might actually be okay. As the months went by, the support group became more than just a place to unload my pain. It became a part of my routine, a strange sort of brotherhood forged through shared heartbreak. What started as a weekly gathering to talk about betrayal slowly evolved into something bigger. One of the guys, Mike, mentioned his love for hiking, and another, Dave, joked that his old motorcycle was the only thing keeping him sane. Before long, we were meeting outside the group, hitting the trails, working on cars, or grabbing beers to watch the game. It was these little activities that gave me a sense of purpose again. I hadn't realized how much I'd isolated myself until I started spending time with these guys. They weren't just a support system. They were a reminder that life could still be enjoyable, even after everything I'd been through. We all carried our scars, but there was something empowering about moving forward together. One weekend, I decided to organize a small car meetup at my place. Cars had always been my passion, and I figured it would be a good excuse to do something productive. I sent out a message to the group, expecting maybe 2 or 3 people to show up. Instead, almost everyone came, bringing their own projects, tools, and stories. We spent the day working on engines, sharing tips, and laughing in a way I hadn't in years. By the end of the day, it was clear we'd stumbled onto something more than just a hobby. That first meetup turned into a regular event. Word spread, and soon, friends of friends started showing up. The garage became a hub for guys looking to reconnect with something meaningful. Whether it was fixing up a car, learning something new, or just being around people who understood them. What started as a way to distract myself from my pain grew into something much bigger. A social club for men who'd been through the ringer but weren't ready to give up. It wasn't just about cars, either. Over time, we began organizing events, hiking trips, barbecues, even a charity drive for a local shelter. It was inspiring to see these men, who had all been knocked down by life in some way, channel their pain into something positive. Watching the club grow gave me a sense of pride I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since my marriage fell apart, I felt like I was building something worthwhile. Meanwhile, Olivia's life seemed to continue on its downward spiral. I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. She was struggling to make ends meet, and her attempts at new relationships were falling apart. There was no joy in hearing about her struggles, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I was doing better without her. Emily became a regular presence at the meetups. She loved the energy and excitement of the garage, and the guys adored her. She'd sit on an overturned crate, handing me wrenches or asking a million questions about whatever project I was working on. The bond between us grew even stronger during those moments. She didn't care that I wasn't her biological father. To her, I was just dad. One evening, after everyone had left, Emily handed me a drawing she'd been working on. It was a simple sketch of the two of us standing in front of a car, surrounded by the group. She'd written "our family" in big, blocky letters at the top. I sat there staring at it, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through, and realizing how far we'd come. Emily didn't just see me as her father. She saw me as her safe place, her anchor. That realization gave me strength on the hardest days. The transformation wasn't just about me. The club, Emily, even the garage itself, they all became symbols of what was possible when you refused to let the pain define you. The betrayal I had experienced no longer felt like the end of my story. It was just a chapter, one I had survived, and now I was moving forward. Slowly but surely, I was piecing my life back together. Not the same as before, but maybe even better. Emily became the cornerstone of my new life. I had always loved her, but after the DNA results, I saw our bond in a different light. It wasn't about blood, it was about the moments we had shared, the nights I stayed up with her when she was sick, the mornings I braided her hair before school, and the countless laughs we shared over silly cartoons. Emily was my daughter in every way that mattered. And if there was ever any doubt about where her loyalty lay, she erased it with her actions. After the divorce, Olivia tried to rebuild her relationship with Emily, but it was clear she didn't know how to connect with her anymore. Emily's visits to Olivia's apartment were strained, and she often came home quiet and withdrawn. When I asked her how things were, she would just shrug and say, "It's fine." But I could tell it wasn't. Olivia's instability, her short temper, her frustration with life, was taking a toll on Emily. One evening, after dropping her off at Olivia's place, I got a call barely 2 hours later. It was Emily, her voice trembling. She asked me to come pick her up. When I arrived, she was waiting outside with her backpack, her eyes red from crying. Olivia didn't even come out to see her off. That night, Emily climbed into bed with me like she used to when she was little. She didn't say much, but the way she curled up against me said everything I needed to know. From that point on, Emily's preference for staying with me became clear. She rarely wanted to go to Olivia's, and when she did, it was more out of obligation than desire. Olivia noticed, of course, and it wasn't long before she started accusing me of turning Emily against her. But I never badmouthed Olivia in front of Emily. I didn't need to. Olivia's own actions were enough to alienate her. Emily and I built a rhythm to our days. I made breakfast in the mornings, drove her to school, and helped her with homework in the evenings. She loved tagging along to the garage, where she became a favorite among the guys. They'd teach her small things about cars, and she'd beam with pride every time she learned something new. The garage was as much her space as it was mine. One day, while we were working on a project together, she looked up at me and said, "I'm glad I have you, Dad." It hit me harder than I expected. She didn't say it often, but when she did, it was with a conviction that left no room for doubt. I was her dad, no matter what the DNA test said. That loyalty was tested one weekend when Olivia invited Emily to a family gathering. It was supposed to be a chance for Olivia to reconnect with her side of the family, but things didn't go as planned. Emily later told me that Olivia had been trying to explain her version of the divorce to everyone, painting herself as the victim. At one point, one of Olivia's relatives made a comment about how it was nice of Alex to still let Emily stay with him even though he's not her real father. When Emily told me this later, her face was flushed with anger. She said she had spoken up right then and there, telling them that I was her real father in every way that mattered. She told them that I was the one who had been there for her, and that nothing Olivia, or anyone else, could say would change that. I didn't know whether to feel proud or heartbroken. Proud because Emily was standing up for what she believed in, but heartbroken that she even had to. The fact that she felt the need to defend our relationship said so much about how deeply this betrayal had rippled through all of our lives. After that incident, Emily stopped making excuses to visit Olivia. Her time with her mother dwindled to almost nothing, and while I tried to encourage her to keep the connection, she was firm. She chose to be with me, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Her loyalty gave me the strength to keep going. Knowing that Emily saw me as her rock, as her family, reminded me why I was fighting so hard to rebuild our lives. The betrayal that had once felt like it had shattered everything was slowly becoming just another part of our story. A painful chapter, yes, but not the whole book. With Emily by my side, I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was moving forward, step by step, and building a life that was ours and ours alone. It was never in my plans to find love again. After Olivia's betrayal, I had resigned myself to the idea that relationships weren't worth the risk. My energy was focused on Emily, the garage, and the new life I was piecing together. But life, as I was learning, has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I met Natalie at one of our car club events. She wasn't a member, at least not officially. She'd come with her brother, who was a friend of one of the guys in the group. She stood out, not just because she was the only woman at the meetup that day, but because of the easy way she blended in, chatting with the group like she'd known us for years. She wasn't flashy or overly polished. She had a natural warmth about her. Her smile was genuine, and when she started talking about her own love for classic cars, I couldn't help but be drawn to her. At first, I kept my distance. Natalie was kind and approachable, but I wasn't ready to put myself out there again. I didn't even trust myself to read people anymore. Not after Olivia. But Natalie had a way of breaking down walls without even trying. She'd ask questions about the projects I was working on, her curiosity so sincere it caught me off guard. Over time, she started coming to more meetups, and eventually, it felt strange not to see her there. It wasn't until a few months later, when the club organized a charity drive, that I realized how much she had become a part of my life. She had volunteered to help with the event, and seeing her wrangling donations, laughing with the guys, and even coaxing Emily out of her shyness left me feeling something I hadn't felt in years: hope. She wasn't just a visitor in my life. She was becoming a part of it. One day, Emily mentioned Natalie in passing. She had been helping Natalie pack up supplies after the charity drive, and she casually said, "Natalie's really nice. I think she likes you, Dad." I laughed it off at the time, but the idea lingered. Could I really open myself up to someone again? Was it fair to Emily to let someone new into our lives? Natalie made it easy to answer those questions. She wasn't pushy or demanding. She didn't try to rush anything. She was simply there, present, supportive, and understanding in a way that felt like the exact opposite of what I'd experienced with Olivia. I found myself opening up to her without even realizing it. About Emily, about the betrayal, about how lost I'd felt in the aftermath. She listened, not with pity, but with quiet empathy. She never made me feel weak for having been broken. Emily adored her, and that made all the difference. She'd light up whenever Natalie came around, asking her a million questions about her favorite cars or dragging her into some craft project she was working on. Natalie handled it all with patience and humor, her bond with Emily growing stronger with every interaction. Watching them together, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't thought possible. Eventually, Natalie and I started spending more time together outside the club. She'd come over for dinner, and we'd sit in the backyard talking long after Emily had gone to bed. Our connection grew naturally, without the pressure or pretense I had come to associate with relationships. It wasn't about fixing each other or filling a void, it was about finding joy in each other's company. The first time Natalie stayed late enough for Emily to notice, I was nervous. I didn't want her to feel like I was replacing her mother, even though Olivia had long since faded from our daily lives. But Emily, as always, surprised me. She grinned at Natalie over breakfast the next morning and said, "You should come over more often." That was when I knew I wasn't just building a relationship with Natalie, I was building a family. Over time, Natalie and I grew closer, and so did our connection with Emily. We started taking weekend trips together, blending our lives in small but meaningful ways. Natalie had 2 boys from her previous marriage, and when we introduced them to Emily, it felt like the missing pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The kids got along almost instantly, their laughter filling the house in a way I hadn't heard in years. For the first time, I let myself dream about a future again. A future where the betrayal and heartbreak weren't the defining moments of my life, but stepping stones to something better. Natalie wasn't a replacement for what I'd lost. She was something new, something I never expected but desperately needed. Together, we were creating a family built not on perfection, but on love, trust, and resilience. What Olivia had broken, Natalie helped me rebuild. Not by fixing me, but by showing me that it was okay to move forward. That love, when it's real, doesn't take away, it gives. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. The life I was living now felt almost unrecognizable compared to the one I had before. What had once seemed like an insurmountable tragedy, the betrayal, the divorce, the DNA test, was now just a memory, a chapter one had survived and moved past. The pain wasn't gone completely, and I doubted it ever would be, but it had dulled, fading into the background as new memories and joys took its place. Natalie and I officially became a family, blending our lives in a way that felt natural and fulfilling. Emily adored her, and her 2 boys, Liam and Sam, became like brothers to her. Our house, once so empty and quiet, was now filled with laughter, the sounds of video games being played, and the occasional bickering that only siblings can pull off. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos I had come to cherish. Despite everything, Emily remained the heart of my world. She grew into a confident, kind-hearted kid who never let the shadows of the past define her. She had every reason to feel confused or angry about what had happened with Olivia, but instead, she showed a resilience that inspired me every day. We had our traditions, too: Sunday pancakes, trips to the garage, and evenings spent watching old car shows. She still drew little pictures for me, sticking them on the fridge or tucking them into my toolbox, and every single one was a reminder of how far we'd come. Olivia's life, on the other hand, had taken a very different turn. From what little I heard, her relationship with the man she had cheated with had ended almost as quickly as it began. She moved from one job to the next, struggling to maintain the lifestyle she had taken for granted during our marriage. Her visits with Emily became less frequent, more awkward. Emily seemed to sense that Olivia's focus wasn't on her, and though I tried to encourage their relationship for Emily's sake, it was clear she didn't feel the same connection to her mother anymore. One day, Olivia called me out of the blue, her voice brittle and distant. She wanted to talk, she said. Reluctantly, I agreed, meeting her at a small coffee shop in town. She looked different, tired, worn down in a way that made it hard to reconcile her with the vibrant woman I had once known. She didn't mince words. She admitted she'd made mistakes, that she had taken our life for granted and destroyed it without truly understanding what she was giving up. But it wasn't an apology, it was more of a lament, a realization of her own failures. I didn't feel anger anymore. What was left was a strange mix of pity and detachment. I had already mourned the loss of what we had, and I had no interest in revisiting it. I listened to her, but I didn't offer her comfort. She had made her choices, and now she was living with them. I had too much to lose to let her back into my life in any meaningful way. Emily, however, was a different story. I made it clear to Olivia that if she truly wanted to rebuild a relationship with her daughter, the effort had to come from her. No more half-hearted visits or excuses. If she wasn't willing to put in the work, she would lose Emily completely. Whether she followed through or not wasn't something I could control. My focus was on being the father Emily needed, the one who showed up and stayed. As for Natalie, she became more than just my partner. She became my best friend, my teammate, and my second chance. We had our challenges, as all blended families do, but we faced them together. Where I once saw only the ruins of my old life, I now saw something new and beautiful. A family built on trust, love, and second chances. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, the kids laughing over some inside joke, Natalie reached over and squeezed my hand. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. The bitterness and pain that had once consumed me were gone, replaced by gratitude. For Emily. For Natalie. For this life I never expected to have. I still thought about the past sometimes, but it didn't hurt like it used to. If anything, it served as a reminder of what I had survived and how far I had grown. Olivia's betrayal had nearly broken me, but it hadn't defined me. It had forced me to confront the cracks in my life and rebuild something stronger, something that could withstand the storms. Now, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the man who had been betrayed. I saw a father, a partner, and a survivor. I saw someone who had found a way to turn heartbreak into hope, and who had built a life worth living. The scars were still there, faint but visible. But they no longer represented pain, they represented healing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.